everyone, welcome back to PrepTalk Podcast. I'm your host Vartika Bhandari and this is season number 2, episode 5 of everything about ACT exams. In this episode, we will learn every small detail about ACT science section. To further address our question about this section, we have Ashish Kumar, director and science mentor at Tutela. Hello sir, welcome back to the show. How have you been?
Thank you so much, Vartika, for having me here. And I have been doing good. And, here I am to brief the entire things or the details about ACT Science as a section so that the kids who are listening to our podcast gets benefited out of it.
Absolutely. Going on to the first question. When we think about science, it involves a lot of broader facets of subjects. Can you simplify what exactly is covered under ACT science section?
I'll simplify that definitely. But before that, I would love to share a story with you.
Sure.
So in 2011, when I started teaching my first batch for ACT science, that time I used to feel so much of hindrance from students and parents about that this has got a science section into it. And if my kids are not applying for STEM related courses, they need not appear for ACT. This notion is entirely wrong. And to address that or to make people understand, what I did was I picked one ACT paper where there were 3-4 passages in total, and I replaced all the scientific terminologies with name of candies and flavors. And immediately we observed that the comfort level of kids were higher, and they started understanding that ACT science is not at all about actual know-how of science. That actual know-how is required for maximum 1 to 2 questions out of 40, but not more than that. It's all about data. It's all about interpretation. So now to come back to your question, ACT science as a section has 40 questions in total, split over in total of 6 passages, and has to be solved within 35 minutes of time. These passages are categorized by ACT in physical science, that involves physics and chemistry, then life science, the entire biology, and lastly, earth science. So in total, physical science, roughly 3 passages in number, life science, roughly 2 passages in number, and earth science, just 1 passage in total. But we highly discourage users or kids to perceive the content in this manner. We at Tutela, we have split the content into the nature of questions or the nature of skills it requires to answer those questions. According to us, there are 3 broader categories of questions or passages rather. First one, data interpretation. Second one, experiment based. And third one, conflicting viewpoints. Data interpretation talks broadly about graphs, figures, charts. Experiment based talks about interlinking between consecutive steps of an experiment being performed. Conflicting viewpoint is an argumentation based passage between between 2 people, 2 scientists, about a common agenda, about a common topic that might belong to any branch of the sciences. So this is the broader segregation in which data interpretation roughly gets asked 2 to 3 passages in number, experiment based again 2 to 3 passages in number, and conflicting viewpoint 1 passage in total. Now I hope Vartika was clear in making the segregation of content to you.
Yes, absolutely. So moving on to our next question, if you have to compare all the sections in ACT, how would you rate the difficulty level of science section?
Science is believed to be the easiest if you implement the rules of question solving rather than looking at it as science content. So it's very easy to score a perfect, that is 36 out of 36 in science, in comparison to getting the same in grammar or math or reading as a section. The only hindrance which we experience is this section is the 4th one in the entire exam. By the time you reach here, the fatigue kicks in.
Right.
If that gets overcome really well, science is believed to be the easiest section out of the four.
Okay, so since you mentioned that students feel fatigued by the time they reach the science section, so what are your recommendations for the students to feel more energized while attempting the section and not lose the points just because of low energy?
So, one thing I personally recommend in my classes, once the syllabus content is delivered, once the kids know what all varieties of question are there and what all method they need to use in order to answer data interpretation or experiment based or conflicting viewpoint passages, we start taking sectional. But these sectionals are special. Rather than giving them 35 minutes of time in total to solve the section, we start reducing the time. We train ourselves to bundle the paper in 30 minutes so that this 5 minute surplus can be translated or can be used when fatigue kicks in. And hence, you see the performance of our kids. Most of the time, they get a 35 or a 36 in science as a section, particularly.
Absolutely. So, what course material do you suggest, and how many sectionals do you suggest the student should take?
In terms of course material, I think our in-house worksheets and which we have very well fragmented between the types of questions. So let's assume we are talking about data interpretation as the passage. Within data interpretation, there are read and report kind of questions. There are locator-based questions. There are interpolation, extrapolation-based questions. There are math-based questions. So see, we have worksheets that defines these questions in details. We make kids practice these questions on the type of question basis rather than passage as a whole. So those worksheets, those in-house class content, along with our online learning platform. So this online learning platform figures out the weak areas in student and automatically makes them practice more questions corresponding to these weak topics. So the worksheets along with online learning platform, and in addition to this, the past papers, which are approximately 80 to 19 number, these are sufficient amount of content for a user to get ready. In terms of sectional, I recommend somewhere around 5 to 10 is the optimum count for science to achieve the best and to reach out a targeted goal. 10 sections are optimum in number.
All right. So, how do you suggest students tackle the confusing charts and graphs of the section?
Okay. To give you a brief here, charts and figures usually gets asked in data interpretation passages. There are wide categorizations of these charts and figures, and each category has a specific way, the way we are reading the chart. So, for example, a normal graph where a value on y-axis and a value on x-axis has been plotted, the moment we are looking at the data, usually kids follow how the data has changed. But we recommend not only to look into change, rather, we need to look into the independent, dependent, and control variable corresponding to that graph, and also find the relationship between independent and dependent, the nature of relationship, or for that say dependent and independent, for that say control and independent or control and dependent variable before you step into question. So there is specific method for specific type of chart, figure or graph, which we teach in our classes for science.
Okay. So, how can a student set a target score for this section?
Use a diagnostic, that is, appear for a diagnostic test anywhere. Let's say if you're getting a diagnostic score of 25 questions correct out of 40, then realistically categorize these questions into groups. Whether these questions belong to data interpretation, experiment based, or conflicting viewpoint. And these categories are present in ACT's answering scheme. Once you have categorized this, start with the easiest, which is data interpretation. It's very easy to optimize your score, get a perfect in data interpretation based questions. So first, start practicing more of data interpretation. Get yourself aligned towards these different varieties of graphs, charts, tables. Once you figure a pattern, your score will start reaching optimum. And once you have reached there, Then shift yourself to experiment-based questions. And now you should specifically practice those key areas where you are lagging the most. Practice and reach to again optimum experiment-based, and keep the conflicting viewpoint towards last, because it is just one passage in number and carries 6 to 7 questions. So first our target would be to reach to a 30 plus accuracy, and then start focusing on conflicting viewpoint. So this is broadly how they should tackle the score improvement from diagnostic to their dream score.
All right. So, do you think SAT has an upper hand over ACT since it does not have a science section and could be considered more scoring, or is it just a myth?
So, I'll be more biased here. So, again, that was just for, fun. I was not meaning in actual. So, when you look into ACT, if a section involves just analytics, data, interpretation, so 25% of the paper comes naturally to, most of the kids, if they are good in referring to the trend and data. So I recommend that get the diagnostic test done. If science is your strength, or if data interpretation is your strength, definitely you will have an upper edge doing ACT. Because basically 25% of the paper is coming very easy to you, which is not true in SAT. So I would place in terms of easiness, if somebody has a better know-how of data and trend, ACT will be an easier test. If somebody has a deeper insight of language, is an avid reader, usually SAT will come out to be an easier test for those kids.
Okay, so moving on to our last question. What points should the students keep in mind while taking the science section?
The first and the foremost, it's not science. It's just the name is science. It's actually not the science. And there is no defined syllabus to it. That is, you might see the most recent invention or discovery in the branch of science as one of the passages. Or you might also see those content which has been done 100 or 150 years back. So once there is no defined syllabus, you cannot group it as a science subject. The moment you realize that this is not science, this is data interpretation, half of your work is done. Second is, ACT science section is very time critical. If you are ending up wasting a lot of time in a given type of passage, your score will take a toll. So you should also train yourself to leave a given type of passage and attempt the easiest one first, because each question carries equal weightage. So at the end, if I end up doing 36 easier questions and leave 4 difficult, my score can be 36. But in the same amount of time, I might end up doing 30 easier questions and just those 4 difficult ones. And at best, my score will just reach to a 34. So we must balance and acknowledge what it feels difficult to us and what it feels easier to us. And these are the 2 suggestions which I would love to share.
Okay. So with this, we conclude our today's podcast. Thank you so much, Ashish sir, for being here.
Anytime, Vartika. It's pleasure sharing these insights. And I hope all our listeners get benefited out of this entire discussion.
Absolutely. So to all the listeners, we hope today's podcast was helpful for you. If you like this segment, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and share it to other aspirants. Stay tuned for the next episode, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye.